The video went viral within 24 hours. Tommy Patterson, Jake's youngest friend, had been recording everything on his phone, expecting to capture what he thought would be an amusing failure. Instead, he'd documented something extraordinary. The footage showed Sarah's calm demeanor, Jake's overconfident taunting, and then, those 5 perfect shots that had left everyone speechless. Mystery Woman Destroys Cocky Shooter at 800 Yards. Read the YouTube title. Within the first day, it had 500,000 views and thousands of comments ranging from amazed praise to skeptical accusations of the video being fake. Sarah knew nothing about her newfound internet fame as she went about her normal Sunday routine. She'd driven back to Billings the night before and spent a quiet evening reading, just as she did every weekend. Her small apartment was Spartan but comfortable, furnished with the kind of practical items that could be packed and moved quickly if necessary. Her phone had been buzzing with unknown numbers since late Saturday night, but she'd learned long ago to ignore calls from people she didn't recognize. Military life had taught her the value of operational security, and civilian life had reinforced the wisdom of maintaining privacy. Meanwhile, back in Cedar Falls, Jake Peterson was discovering what it meant to be on the wrong side of viral fame. Jake, you've got to see this. His With the coffee shop in downtown Missoula was busy enough to provide cover, but quiet enough for conversation. Sarah had chosen it carefully, a 3-hour drive from Billings in a city where she was unlikely to be recognized. She arrived early and selected a corner table with clear sight lines to all entrances, old habits that would never completely fade. Kevin Hartley looked younger than she'd expected, probably in his late 20s with the eager demeanor of someone who'd grown up consuming military content online rather than living it. His camera operator, a slightly older woman named Jessica, set up discreet equipment while Kevin reviewed his notes. "I have to say, Ms. Martinez, you're not what I pictured," Kevin said as he tested his microphone. "What did you picture?" "I don't know, someone more intimidating?" The shooting in that video was so precise, so professional. "I guess I expected someone who looked more like the stereotypical special ops soldier." Sarah smiled slightly. "That's exactly the point. People make assumptions based on appearance, and those assumptions can be dangerous. Speaking of assumptions, let's start there. Can you tell our viewers about your military background?" Sarah had rehearsed this part. "I served 8 years in the Navy, including multiple deployments overseas. My training included advanced marksmanship and small unit tactics." "When you say advanced marksmanship, what level of training are we talking about?" "The kind that prepares you for precision shooting in challenging conditions. Long-range interdiction, counter-sniper operations, target elimination in support of ground forces." Kevin's eyes lit up. Those were the kinds of details that made for compelling content. "And you saw combat." "I completed multiple combat deployments in Afghanistan and Iraq. Beyond that, I prefer not to discuss specifics." "Fair enough. So when you walked into that shooting range in Cedar Falls and heard those men making assumptions about your abilities, what was going through your mind?" Sarah thought back to that moment, remembering the familiar weight of being underestimated. "Honestly, I was tired. Tired of being looked at and immediately dismissed. Tired of people thinking they know what I'm capable of based on how I look." The video shows you staying remarkably calm throughout their taunting. "Was that difficult?" "I've been in situations where staying calm meant the difference between life and death for myself and my teammates. A few weekend warriors making jokes wasn't particularly stressful." Jessica, the camera operator, spoke up. "Can you walk us through what you were thinking during the actual shooting?" "The first shot was intentional ranging. I needed to confirm my ballistic calculations and read the wind conditions. After that, it was just applying the fundamentals I'd trained on for thousands of hours." "Thousands of hours?" Kevin asked. "Military sniper training doesn't stop at graduation. It's constant practice, constant refinement. Shooting at 800 yards in perfect weather conditions with a stable rest is actually easier than most of the shots I trained for." "What kind of shots did you train for?" Sarah paused, considering how much to reveal. "Moving targets, elevated positions, adverse weather, time pressure, hostile fire. The range that day was like a controlled training environment." The interview continued for another hour, with Sarah carefully navigating between providing interesting content and maintaining operational security. She talked about the challenges of being a woman in special operations, the importance of physical and mental preparation, and the camaraderie that sustained military personnel through difficult deployments. What she didn't mention was the specific unit she'd served with, the classified operations she'd participated in, or the 3 confirmed enemy kills that had earned her a Bronze Star with V device for valor. As they wrapped up the interview, Kevin asked one final question. What message would you want people to take away from your story? Sarah considered this carefully. Don't judge people's capabilities by their appearance. The most dangerous person in the room might be the one you least expect. And sometimes the quiet person in the corner has the most interesting story. After Kevin and Jessica left, Sarah sat alone in the coffee shop, processing what she'd just done. For the first time in over a year, she'd spoken publicly about her military service. It felt both liberating and terrifying. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus Stone. Heard you did an interview today. Hope it goes well. Coffee sometime if you're ever in the DC area. The military network was impressive in its speed and reach. Word of her interview was already spreading through veteran communities before it was even edited. The video was released 3 days later with the title Female Navy SEAL Explains Viral Shooting Video. Within hours, it had generated hundreds of thousands of views and thousands of comments. The response was overwhelmingly positive, with veterans sharing their own stories of being underestimated and civilians expressing amazement at the level of training involved in special operations. But not all the attention was welcome. Sarah was having breakfast at Mabel's when her phone rang with a call from a Montana area code she didn't recognize. Ms. Martinez? This is Sheriff Tom Bradley from Cascade County. I was wondering if you might be able to help us with a situation. Sarah was immediately alert. What kind of situation? We've got a barricaded suspect about 30 miles outside of Great Falls. He's holed up in a farmhouse with hostages, and my department sniper is out with a broken arm. State police are sending someone, but it'll be hours before they arrive. I saw your interview, and I know you're qualified for this kind of work. Sarah's training kicked in automatically, her mind already processing tactical considerations. How many hostages? 3 that we know of, the suspect's ex-wife and 2 children. He's been drinking, making threats, fired a few shots when we approached. Classic domestic situation gone bad. What's your tactical setup? We've got the house surrounded, but we need Overwatch in case this goes sideways. Someone who can make a clean shot if the hostages are in immediate danger. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. She'd walked away from this life specifically to avoid moments like this, situations where split-second decisions determined who lived and who died. Sheriff, I'm not active duty anymore. I don't have arrest authority or, Ms. Martinez, I'm asking you as a consultant. We'll handle all the legal aspects. We just need your skills if things go bad. Mabel was watching from behind the counter, her experienced eyes reading Sarah's expression. The old woman nodded slightly, as if to say that some responsibilities transcended retirement. I'll be there in 2 hours, Sarah said. The drive to the scene gave her time to mentally prepare for what she might face. She'd responded to similar situations during her military career, though usually in foreign countries against enemy combatants rather than disturbed civilians. The principles were the same, but the emotional weight was different when the hostages were American children. The farmhouse sat in an isolated valley surrounded by rolling hills. Sheriff Bradley had established a command post behind a ridge line that provided concealment while allowing observation of the target building. Sarah could see immediately that his people were competent, but limited by equipment and training. What's the latest? She asked as Bradley briefed her on the situation. Suspect is David Morrison, 42, history of domestic violence and substance abuse. Divorce was finalized last month. Custody hearing was supposed to be today. He showed up at his ex-wife's house drunk and armed, forced her and the kids inside when we arrived. Recent communication? He's been ranting about the court system, says he won't let anyone take his kids away. Made threats to harm them if we try to enter. Sarah studied the house through binoculars, noting windows, angles of fire, and potential shooting positions. What's your rules of engagement? If the hostages are in immediate mortal danger, you're authorized to take the shot. Otherwise, we wait for the state team and try to negotiate. Sarah nodded and began setting up her rifle on a hillside that provided optimal angles to the house. The range was approximately 400 yards. well within her capabilities but requiring careful consideration of wind conditions and the precise layout of the building. Through her scope, she could see movement in the front windows. Morrison appeared to be agitated, pacing back and forth with a rifle in his hands. She could occasionally glimpse his ex-wife and children in the background, huddled together on a couch. "Command, this is Overwatch," she radioed. "I have eyes on suspect and hostages. Suspect appears intoxicated and unstable. Hostages appear unharmed at this time." For the next 3 hours, Sarah maintained her position while negotiators attempted to establish communication with Morrison. His responses were increasingly erratic, and his behavior was becoming more aggressive toward the hostages. At 3:47 p.m., the situation escalated rapidly. "He's got the rifle pointed at one of the kids." Bradley's voice crackled over the radio. "Overwatch, do you have a shot?" Sarah's scope was trained on the front window where Morrison was visible in profile, his rifle aimed toward the couch where the family was seated. The angle was challenging. She could see approximately 60% of his torso, with the window frame partially obstructing her view. "I have a partial shot," she reported. "Clean kill probability is roughly 70%. Risk of overpenetration through the window is minimal. He's yelling at the boy to come over to him," came another voice over the radio. "Kid looks terrified." Through her scope, Sarah could see Morrison becoming increasingly agitated. His finger was on the trigger, and his weapon was trained on his 7-year-old son. The boy was crying, frozen in place by fear and confusion. "Overwatch, you are cleared to take the shot," Bradley commanded. "Repeat, you are cleared to engage." Sarah controlled her breathing, settling into the familiar rhythm of precision shooting. The fundamentals were exactly the same as they'd been at the range in Cedar Falls, but the stakes were infinitely higher. A missed shot could result in return fire toward the hostages. An errant bullet could kill an innocent person, but doing nothing meant watching a child die. The crosshairs settled on Morrison's upper torso, the only part of his body clearly visible through the window. Sarah calculated the ballistic path, accounting for the slight downward angle and the possibility of bullet deflection from the glass. "Target acquired," she whispered into her radio. Taking the shot, the rifle bucked against her shoulder with familiar authority. Through the scope, she saw Morrison collapse immediately, his weapon falling away from the hostages as he dropped to the floor. "Suspect down," she reported, already chambering another round in case Morrison was only wounded. "Hostages appear safe." The tactical team stormed the house within minutes, finding Morrison dead from a single gunshot wound to the chest. The hostages were shaken but unharmed, the children clinging to their mother as medics checked them over. Sheriff Bradley approached Sarah as she was packing up her rifle. "Hell of a shot," he said quietly. "That boy owes his life to you." Sarah nodded, but didn't respond. The immediate tactical situation was resolved, but the emotional processing was just beginning. Taking a life was never easy, even when it was clearly justified to save innocents. "There'll be an investigation," Bradley continued. "Standard procedure for officer-involved shootings. But, based on what I saw, you did exactly what needed to be done." As Sarah drove back to Billings that evening, she reflected on how quickly her quiet civilian life had been disrupted. 2 weeks ago, she'd been an anonymous former soldier living peacefully in Montana. Now she was a viral internet sensation who'd just killed a man to save hostages. The next morning, news of the hostage rescue had spread across law enforcement networks and military veteran communities. Her phone was ringing constantly with interview requests, job offers from private security companies, and messages of support from fellow veterans. Marcus Stone called personally. "Sarah, I heard about yesterday. How are you holding up?" "I'm fine," she said automatically, then reconsidered. "Actually, I'm not sure. It feels strange to be back in that world. You saved those kids. That matters more than your comfort level." "I know. It's just, I thought I was done with making those kinds of decisions." "Maybe the world isn't done needing people who can make them," Marcus suggested. "Look, there are opportunities out there for someone with your skills and judgment. Contract work, training programs, consulting with law enforcement. You don't have to disappear again." After the call, Sarah sat in her apartment thinking about her future. The anonymity she'd carefully cultivated was gone forever, destroyed by 5 perfect shots at a shooting range and 1 life-saving shot at a farmhouse. But maybe that wasn't entirely a bad thing. Her laptop chimed with an email from Sheriff Bradley. Sarah, I've been fielding calls all morning from law enforcement agencies across the state asking about your availability for similar situations. There's a real need for someone with your expertise. If you're interested, I can put you in touch with the right people. Another email was from Kevin Hartley. The story about the hostage rescue is exploding across social media. People are calling you a real-life superhero. Would you consider a follow-up interview? Sarah closed her laptop and walked to her window, looking out at the city where she'd tried to build a normal life. Maybe normal was overrated. Maybe there was value in being someone who could step up when others couldn't, who possessed skills that could make the difference between tragedy and resolution. Her phone buzzed with a text from Mabel. Saw the news. Proud of you, honey. Coffee's on the house whenever you're ready to come back. For the first time since the shooting range incident, Sarah smiled genuinely. She might not be anonymous anymore, but she was still surrounded by people who cared about her as a person rather than as a symbol or a story. The next chapter of her life was beginning, and while it wasn't the quiet retirement she'd planned, it might be exactly what the world needed from her. Sometimes heroes had to step out of the shadows, not for fame or recognition, but because there were still people who needed saving and too few people capable of saving them. Sarah Martinez was done hiding who she was. The world would just have to learn to accept that heroes came in all shapes and sizes, and that the most dangerous person in the room might just be the quiet woman in the corner who'd rather be left alone. But when duty called, she would always answer, Carol said, bursting into their kitchen where he sat nursing his third cup of coffee and a wounded ego. The whole internet is talking about what happened at the range yesterday. Jake groaned and buried his head in his hands. Please tell me someone didn't post that video. Carol held up her tablet, showing the view count that was climbing by the minute. Honey, everyone's posting it. It's on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. Someone even turned it into a meme. She showed him the latest creation, a photo of his shocked face with the caption, "When you realize the little lady is actually John Wick." The comments section was brutal, filled with observations about his sexist assumptions and praise for the mysterious woman who'd put him in his place. God damn it, Tommy, Jake muttered. I'm going to kill that kid. But Tommy Patterson was having troubles of his own. His simple recording had caught the attention of military enthusiasts, shooting sports forums, and veteran groups across the internet. People were analyzing every frame of the video, trying to identify the woman who demonstrated such extraordinary marksmanship. That's not civilian shooting, wrote one commenter who identified himself as a former Marine sniper. Look at her stance, her breathing technique, the way she makes those scope adjustments. That's military precision training, and at a very high level. Another expert chimed in. The ballistic calculations she's doing in her notebook, the systematic approach to range estimation, even the way she handles the rifle. This woman has serious tactical training. My guess is special operations background. The speculation was getting closer to the truth than Sarah would have been comfortable with, had she known about it. Former military members were sharing the video in private groups, asking if anyone recognized the shooter. The tight-knit community of special operations veterans was particularly intrigued by the demonstration of skills that few outside their ranks possessed. On Monday morning, Sarah's peaceful anonymity began to crack. She was having her usual breakfast at Mabel's Diner, a small establishment near her apartment where she'd become a regular over the past 6 months. The elderly owner, Mabel Chun, had always treated her with warmth and respect, never prying into her background or asking uncomfortable questions about why a young woman lived alone with no apparent family connections. Sarah, honey, Mabel said, approaching her table with the coffee pot and an uncertain expression. You've got some visitors asking about you. Sarah looked up from her newspaper, immediately alert. What kind of visitors? Couple of young men with cameras. Said they're from some internet news channel. Wanted to know if I knew anything about the woman who did that amazing shooting yesterday. They showed me a video on their phone, and I swear it looked just like you. Sarah's blood ran cold. She'd been found, somehow connected to the shooting demonstration despite her careful efforts to remain anonymous. She thought quickly about her options, weighing the risks of staying against the complications of running. Did you tell them anything? She asked calmly, though her mind was already calculating escape routes. Mabel sat down across from her, lowering her voice. Honey, I've been around long enough to recognize when someone wants to be left alone. I told them I'd never seen anyone like that around here. But they're persistent, and they're asking questions at other businesses too. Sarah nodded, grateful for the older woman's discretion. I appreciate that, Mabel. I think I might need to take a little trip out of town for a few days. That shooting in the video, that was really you, wasn't it? Mabel asked gently. After a moment's hesitation, Sarah nodded. Mabel reached across the table and patted her hand. I figured. You've got that way about you, quiet confidence, like you've seen things and done things but don't need to brag about it. My late husband was Navy, served in Vietnam. He had the same quality. Thank you for not saying anything, Sarah said. Your business is your business, honey. But can I give you some advice from an old woman who's watched a lot of young people come and go? Sarah nodded. Sometimes running away just makes things worse. These internet people, they love a mystery. The more you hide, the harder they'll look. Maybe it's time to tell your story on your own terms, before someone else tells it wrong. Sarah considered this wisdom as she finished her coffee. Mabel was probably right, but the thought of media attention made her skin crawl. She joined the military to serve her country, not to become a celebrity. Her special operations career had required anonymity, and civilian life had promised the same blessed invisibility. Her phone buzzed with another unknown number. This time, she decided to answer. Sarah Martinez? The voice was young, eager, and male. Who's asking? Ms. Martinez, my name is Kevin Hartley from Digital Combat Sports Network. We've been trying to reach you about the incredible shooting demonstration you gave at Cedar Falls Range yesterday. Would you be willing to do an interview? How did you get this number? We have our sources, Kevin said, clearly pleased with himself. Ms. Martinez, that video has been viewed over 2 million times in less than 36 hours. People are calling it the best demonstration of long-range shooting they've ever seen. Our viewers would love to know more about your background. Sarah hung up without another word. Within minutes, her phone was ringing again. Then again. By the time she paid her check and left the diner, she'd received calls from 3 different media outlets, 2 podcast hosts, and something called the Tactical Shooting Channel. She drove home carefully, checking her mirrors for anyone who might be following her. Her apartment complex was quiet, but she noticed a van with tinted windows parked across the street that hadn't been there when she left. The vehicle had the unmistakable look of a surveillance setup. Sarah parked in her usual spot and walked calmly to her front door, but her mind was racing through contingency plans. She'd prepared for this possibility when she first moved to Billings, establishing multiple exit strategies and backup identities in case her past ever caught up with her. Inside her apartment, she went straight to her bedroom and pulled out a go bag she'd hoped never to use. It contained cash, false identification documents, and everything she'd need to disappear completely. She'd learned operational security from the best instructors in the military, and those lessons had served her well in transitioning to civilian life. But as she held the bag, Mabel's words echoed in her mind. Running would only fuel more speculation, create more mystery around her identity. And there was something else, a growing sense that maybe it was time to stop hiding who she was. Her laptop chimed with a new email notification. The message was from an address she didn't recognize, but the subject line caught her attention. From a fellow team guy. She opened it cautiously. Sarah, you don't know me, but I know your work. Your shooting demonstration has the community talking, and some people are starting to put pieces together. Before this gets out of control, you might want to consider controlling the narrative yourself. I've got connections with some good people in media who would handle your story with respect. Let me know if you want to talk. Semper Fi. Marcus Stone, Force Recon, retired. Sarah stared at the message for a long time. Marcus Stone was a name she recognized from the special operations community, a Marine who'd had a distinguished career before transitioning to civilian work as a military consultant. His reputation was solid, and his offer seemed genuine. She looked around her apartment, at the quiet life she'd built for herself. It wasn't much, but it was hers. The anonymity had been comforting, but it had also been isolating. She'd cut herself off from the military community, from the camaraderie and shared understanding that had sustained her through the hardest years of her life. Maybe it was time to stop running from who she was. Her phone rang again, and This time she recognized the number as Kevin Hartley calling back. Instead of declining the call, she answered. "Ms. Martinez, please don't hang up," Kevin said quickly. "I understand you value your privacy, but I think you should know that other outlets are working on this story with or without your cooperation. Wouldn't you rather tell your side?" "What exactly do you think you know about me?" Sarah asked. "We know you're former military, probably special operations based on your shooting skills. We know you live in Billings, and you prefer to keep to yourself. We know you humiliated a local braggart who thought women couldn't shoot. Beyond that, we're just as curious as everyone else." Sarah was quiet for a moment, processing this. The information was accurate, but incomplete, which meant they were still fishing for details. "If I were to consider an interview," she said carefully, "what would you want to know?" Kevin's excitement was audible through the phone. "Everything. Your military background, your training, what led you to that shooting range, what you thought when those guys were making fun of you. Our audience loves stories about underdogs proving doubters wrong." "I'm not an underdog," Sarah said firmly. "I'm a professional who was underestimated by people who made assumptions based on my appearance." "Even better," Kevin said. "That's exactly the kind of story that resonates with people. Look, Ms. Martinez, whether you participate or not, this story is going to be told. The video is out there, and people are talking. You can either control your narrative or let others control it for you." It was the same advice Mabel had given her, and the same implication in Marcus Stone's email. The choice wasn't whether her story would be told, but how it would be told and by whom. "If I agreed to talk to you," Sarah said slowly, "I would have conditions." "Of course, absolutely. What would you need?" "Complete editorial control over anything that mentions my military service. No speculation about specific operations or deployments. No discussion of current veterans' issues or politics. And no personal information about my current life or location." Kevin was quiet for a moment, probably consulting with producers or editors. That's pretty restrictive, but I think we can work with it. You're talking about a basic interview about the shooting demonstration and your general background." "That's exactly what I'm talking about. When could we meet?" Sarah looked around her apartment one more time, at the anonymous life she'd carefully constructed. Then, she thought about Jake Peterson's sneering face, about all the times she'd been underestimated and dismissed. Maybe it was time for people to know that heroes came in unexpected packages. "Tomorrow," she said. "But not here, and not where I was identified. I'll choose the location." "Perfect. Ms. Martinez, I think you're going to be surprised by how much people connect with your story." After she hung up, Sarah sat in the growing twilight of her apartment, listening to the sounds of normal life happening around her. Somewhere in the building, a family was having dinner. A television was playing a sitcom laugh track. A dog was barking at something only it could see. For the past year, she'd been trying to blend into this world of mundane concerns and ordinary problems. But maybe she'd been wrong to think she could disappear entirely. Maybe her story, the real story of who she was and what she'd done, was worth telling. Her laptop chimed again with another email from Marcus Stone. "Saw your video again. Made me proud to know there are still warriors out there who can represent the community with that kind of class and skill. Whatever you decide about going public, know that you've got brothers and sisters who have your back." For the first time in months, Sarah felt connected to something larger than her solitary existence. The special operations community was small and tight-knit, bound together by shared experiences that few others could understand. She'd walked away from that world to find peace, but maybe she'd also walked away from the support and understanding that came with it. Tomorrow, she would begin the process of reclaiming her story. Tonight, she would prepare for a conversation that might change everything about her carefully constructed new life. Sarah Martinez had learned to ignore the looks a long time ago. At 5'3" with delicate features and a soft voice, she didn't fit anyone's idea of what a Navy SEAL should look like. Even after 8 years of service and more successful missions than she cared to count, people still did double takes when she mentioned her background. The small-town shooting range in Cedar Falls, Montana, buzzed with the usual Saturday afternoon crowd. Local hunters, weekend warriors, and a handful of police officers filled the lanes, the sharp crack of gunfire echoing through the concrete building. Sarah had driven 3 hours from her new home in Billings to visit this particular range because of its reputation for precision shooting competitions. She carried her worn leather case to the check-in counter, where a burly man with graying hair and calloused hands looked her up and down with barely concealed amusement. "First time shooting, miss?" he asked, his tone patronizing. "We've got some nice .22 rifles that might be more your speed." Sarah smiled politely. "Actually, I was hoping to try your long-range targets. I hear you have some set up at 800 yards. The man's eyebrows shot up. "That's serious shooting territory, sweetheart. Those targets are for experienced marksmen only. Maybe start with something closer, like 50 yards. Before Sarah could respond, a group of men at a nearby table burst into laughter. She recognized the type immediately, local tough guys who treated the shooting range like their personal club. Their leader, a tall man with a beer gut and a Confederate flag t-shirt, stood up and sauntered over. "Did I hear someone talking about 800-yard shots?" he drawled, looking Sarah up and down like she was a curiosity in a museum. "Lady, I've been shooting since before you were born, and 800 yards ain't no joke. That's sniper territory." His buddies gathered behind him, grinning and nodding. One of them, a wiry man with tobacco-stained teeth, chimed in. "My cousin Jake here holds the range record at 600 yards. 5 shots, 4-inch group. Been standing for 3 years." Jake puffed out his chest. "That's right. And I can tell you right now, little lady, shooting like that takes years of practice and the right equipment. What you got in that case there, a pink pistol?" Sarah felt the familiar weight of assumptions settling on her shoulders. She'd faced this same attitude in the military, from drill instructors who thought she'd wash out in the first week to fellow trainees who assumed she was there to fill some diversity quota. The difference was, in the Navy, she'd eventually earned their respect through performance. Here, she was just another civilian trying to prove herself to a bunch of weekend warriors. "I've got a rifle," she said simply, setting her case on the counter. "Mind if I take a look at those 800-yard targets?" Jake let out a belly laugh that attracted attention from other shooters. "Oh, this is rich. Guys, we got ourselves a real Annie Oakley here. Tell you what, sweetheart, since you're so confident, how about we make this interesting?" The range officer, sensing entertainment value, leaned forward. "What kind of interesting?" "Simple bet," Jake said, his voice carrying across the range. 5 shots at 800 yards. If little miss here can put all 5 on the target, I'll pay her range fees for a year. But when she misses, and she will miss, she buys a round of drinks for everyone here." A crowd was forming now, drawn by the commotion. Sarah noticed several people pulling out their phones to record what they clearly expected to be an embarrassing failure. The range officer rubbed his hands together, seeing dollar signs in the form of increased business from the spectacle. "Now hold on," said an older man who'd been quietly cleaning his rifle at a corner table. "That doesn't seem like a fair bet. The lady here might be new to shooting." Jake waved him off. "She's the one who brought up 800 yards, Frank. Besides, look at her. She's probably never even held a real rifle. This'll be educational." Sarah felt the weight of every eye in the place on her. She could walk away, avoid the confrontation, and find another range. That would be the smart play, the diplomatic solution. But something about Jake's smirk and the way his friends were already chuckling at her expense triggered a familiar fire in her chest. "What exactly constitutes hitting the target?" she asked calmly. Jake's grin widened. "Standard target at 800 yards. You put all 5 rounds anywhere on the paper, you win. But here's the thing, sweetheart, that target's only about the size of a dinner plate at that distance. Most people can't even see it clearly through a scope." The crowd murmured approval. Someone called out, "This ought to be good." Another voice added, $20 says she doesn't even hit the dirt berm." Sarah nodded slowly, processing the challenge. She'd made similar shots under combat conditions in Afghanistan, often with hostile fire incoming and lives depending on her accuracy. A stationary paper target in perfect weather conditions should be manageable, assuming her equipment was properly zeroed. "All right," she said, her voice steady. "I accept." The crowd erupted in excited chatter. Money began changing hands as impromptu side bets formed. The consensus seemed to be that Sarah would be lucky to hit the target frame, let alone the scoring rings. Jake rubbed his hands together gleefully. "This is going to be like taking candy from a baby." Hope you brought plenty of cash for those drinks, honey. Sarah opened her rifle case, revealing a custom-built precision rifle based on a Remington 700 action. The weapon was clearly well-maintained, with a high-quality scope and a bipod that showed signs of regular use. The crowd's chatter died down as they took in the serious nature of her equipment. Well, I'll be damned, Frank muttered. That's not a beginner's rifle. Jake's confidence wavered slightly, but he quickly recovered. Nice gun don't make a good shooter. Probably Daddy's hunting rifle or something. Sarah began her pre-shooting routine, checking the rifle's action and examining the barrel for any obstructions. Her movements were methodical and practiced, the muscle memory of countless hours of training taking over. She pulled out a logbook and began making notes about wind conditions, temperature, and humidity. What's all that scribbling for? Asked one of Jake's friends. Ballistic calculations, Sarah replied without looking up. At 800 yards, you have to account for bullet drop, wind drift, and atmospheric conditions. A 5-degree temperature change can affect your point of impact by several inches. The crowd exchanged glances. This wasn't the kind of talk they'd expected from someone they'd assumed was a novice. Jake shifted uncomfortably, but maintained his bravado. All that fancy math won't help when you're looking through that scope, and realize how far 800 yards really is, he said. Pressure's a funny thing. Makes people choke. Sarah finished her calculations and looked up at him with a slight smile. I don't choke under pressure. The range officer led the group to the 800-yard line, where a large spotting scope was already set up to observe the distant target. Sarah took her position on the shooting mat, adjusting the bipod and getting comfortable behind the rifle. The target looked impossibly small through the scope, just a white square against the brown backdrop of the mountain. 5 shots, the range officer announced. Shooter ready? Sarah chambered around and settled into her shooting position. The familiar weight of the rifle stock against her shoulder was comforting, like putting on an old, well-fitting jacket. She controlled her breathing, letting her heart rate slow as she found her natural point of aim. The first shot surprised even her with its crisp break. Through the scope, she saw a small puff of dirt just to the left of the target. The spotter called out, "Miss left." Jake let out a whoop. Told you so. 1 down, 4 to go. But Sarah was already adjusting her scope, making a precise windage correction based on where the bullet had impacted. The crowd didn't understand that her first shot had been intentional, a ranging shot to confirm her ballistic calculations and wind reading. The second shot felt perfect as it left the barrel. This time, the spotter's voice carried a note of surprise. Hit. Dead center. The crowd fell silent. Jake's face showed the first hint of concern as he realized this wasn't going to be the comedy show he'd expected. Sarah's breathing was steady, her focus absolute. The third shot followed the second, and again the spotter called, "Hit." Still center. Now the silence was complete except for the whisper of wind across the range. Sarah could feel the tension building behind her, but it didn't affect her concentration. If anything, the pressure sharpened her focus, the way it had during night raids in hostile territory when missing meant her teammates didn't come home. The fourth shot was delivered with the same mechanical precision. Hit. Tight group. Jake's jaw had dropped open. His friends stood in stunned silence, their earlier jokes forgotten. Someone in the crowd whispered, "Holy shit, she can actually shoot." Sarah chambered her final round, taking an extra moment to ensure her position was perfect. This shot would either validate her reputation or leave room for doubt. She thought briefly of all the times she'd been underestimated, all the assumptions people had made based on her appearance rather than her capabilities. The fifth shot rang out across the range with a finality that seemed to echo longer than the others. Through her scope, Sarah could see the small tear in the target where her bullet had passed through. Hit. The spotter called out, his voice carrying across the now silent range. 5 shots, tight group, all in the X-ring. For a moment, nobody moved. The reality of what they'd just witnessed was sinking in slowly, like water through sand. This petite woman had just demonstrated a level of marksmanship that few of them could match on their best days. Frank was the first to break the silence, letting out a low whistle. In 40 years of shooting, I've never seen anything like that. Lady, that was some serious shooting. Jake stood frozen, his mouth still hanging open. The easy confidence he'd radiated earlier had evaporated completely, replaced by shock and a growing embarrassment as he realized the magnitude of his mistake. Sarah stood up slowly, safing her rifle and beginning to pack up her equipment. Her movements remained calm and methodical, showing no sign of excitement or triumph. To her, this had been a routine demonstration of skills she'd honed through thousands of hours of training and real-world application. "Guess I won't be needing to buy those drinks," she said quietly, her voice carrying clearly in the stunned silence. The crowd began to murmur again, but the tone was completely different now. Respectful whispers replaced mocking laughter. People were pulling up the video recordings on their phones, reviewing the impossible shots they'd just witnessed. One of Jake's friends, a younger man who'd been particularly vocal earlier, approached Sarah hesitantly. "Ma'am, I owe you an apology. That was incredible shooting. Where did you learn to shoot like that?" Sarah looked at him for a moment, considering her answer. She could tell them about her military service, about the specialized training and the combat deployments. But something held her back. Maybe it was the knowledge that revealing her background would only invite more questions, more assumptions about what a female veteran should look like or how she should act. "I've had some training," she said simply, closing her rifle case. Jake finally found his voice, though it came out as a croak. "Some training? Lady, I've never seen. How is that even possible?" Sarah shouldered her case and looked at him with the same calm expression she'd maintained throughout the entire encounter. "You assumed I couldn't shoot because of how I look. Maybe next time you shouldn't judge people based on appearances." The wisdom in her words hung in the air as she walked toward the exit. Behind her, the crowd was still processing what they'd witnessed, their phones buzzing as videos of her shooting were uploaded to social media. Frank hurried to catch up with her at the door. "Miss, wait a minute. That kind of shooting doesn't come from some training. You mind me asking your background?" Sarah paused, her hand on the door handle. She could see genuine curiosity in the old man's eyes, not the condescending attitude she'd faced from Jake and his friends. After a moment's consideration, she decided to give him a partial truth. "Military," she said simply. Frank nodded slowly, pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. "I figured as much." "Infantry." Sarah's smile was enigmatic. "Something like that." As she pushed through the door and walked toward her truck, Sarah could hear the excited conversations erupting behind her. By tonight, the story of the mysterious woman who'd humiliated Jake Peterson would be spreading through Cedar Falls. By tomorrow, it would probably reach the neighboring towns. She didn't mind. Sometimes people needed to have their assumptions challenged. Sometimes the best way to make a point was to let your actions speak louder than your words. As she drove away from the range, Sarah caught a glimpse of Jake in her rearview mirror. He was standing in the parking lot, still looking dazed, while his friends animated discussed what they'd just witnessed. She wondered if he'd learned anything from the experience, or if he'd simply write it off as a fluke. Either way, it wasn't her problem anymore. She had groceries to buy, bills to pay, and a quiet life to get back to. The fact that she'd once been one of the most lethal snipers in naval special warfare was just another chapter in her past, one that most people would never need to know about. But sometimes, just sometimes, it was satisfying to remind the world that heroes came in all shapes and sizes, and that the most dangerous opponents were often the ones you never saw coming.